So I'm going to do that. All right, so my name is Collin Draughon. I am a software product manager here at National Instruments. I am the product manager for the LabVIEW UI in LabVIEW NXG. So all the cool graph controls and indicators that you saw today, all the front panel objects, that's under my purview from a product marketing standpoint. So I work closely with R&D to develop those features. If you have any feedback, feel free to jot down my email address and my name, or come pick up a business card afterwards, which I'll put up. And feel free to send me any feedback on what you guys think moving forward. So we got a lot of stuff to go through. This is probably the worst user interface design slide you'll ever see. But I wanted to kind of get some questions out there, kind of get the conversation started around what does it mean to have an advanced user interface. So this session is called Creating Advanced User Interfaces, and I think people kind of have in their minds just this really complex user interface, lots of graphs, lots of images, lots of controls and indicators going on. But in my mind, it really comes down to three things that make for an advanced user interface. The first one is that we want our users to be as efficient as possible. So that's our number one goal, is really usability. I want to expand it beyond just usability, though, because usability really implies, is it just easy to use? I want people to be efficient when they use my application, or my software, right? So that's the first one. And with efficient usage comes a lot of different questions. So things like, does it allow them to get their job done more efficiently than another interface would have? Is it bringing the user's attention to the appropriate content? And we'll talk about different design styles that enable that. Other questions like, will a user get distracted or overwhelmed by the user interface? That's probably the most common one we see, which is you just put all the controls and indicators on the front panel, and the user quickly gets overwhelmed, and it can be difficult to navigate and figure out what's important in their system. And then finally, does the interface match what the user expects? So a user, we need to recognize going into a system or going into a software application already has some expectations. And those might have been defined by the rest of the industry, so there might be industry best practices that they're expecting to take advantage of. Or there might be things in their physical system that they used to use that they're expecting to see in a software application. So these are things that we need to keep in mind when we're focusing on efficient usage of our software. The second one I would point out is adaptability. So we know that our user interfaces are probably not going to be used on the exact same computer or the exact same screen every time they're launched. So we need to make sure that they can respond to different screen sizes or different platforms or different operating systems. And so we'll talk about some of those features that we've added. And then finally, modularity. So especially for advanced applications or applications that can be complex and need to scale, how do they scale in terms of their user interface as well? So how do I add front panel controls and indicators as my system grows in complexity and as users need to see more data or want to change their data at all? So in my mind, that's what defines an advanced user interface. But I'd be curious for any thoughts from the room. Does this definition miss anything? Are there other things that we want to discuss? Because I want to keep this discussion oriented. Any thoughts? Go ahead. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, web UI. So I think that's kind of amongst the two, efficient usage and adaptability. But what interface are they really connecting to my system with? So is it a web browser? Is it their mobile device? Is it always going to be a desktop application? So yeah, that's a good one. Anybody else have it? Way there in the back.
We probably address this under adaptability and modularity, but we find in our laboratory environments that a good user interface guides people to do the right thing more often than the wrong thing.
Yeah, that's a very important point. So I think that could also fall under some of the user's attention to the appropriate content, right? Are we guiding them through our system appropriately? So yeah, that's a great point. Anybody else? Any other thoughts on advanced UI development? Who would consider their current UI that they're developing advanced? Okay, so about 25%. So we can pick it up a little bit. We'll get there. All right, so let's jump in to each of these. So throughout the presentation, I'll probably be talking about a lot of our partners, alliance partners, like JKI. They make some amazing tools for user interface development. So I'll be kind of putting some of their screenshots out. So under efficient usage, I want to talk about a few things. Some you might have heard of before, some maybe not. One, skeuomorphism. Who's heard of skeuomorphism before? Nice, a few. Anybody want to give a definition of it? No. Anybody? Some brave soul out there? Steve Jobs' favorite. That's kind of what I have a definition, so don't worry. The presentation can still continue. We'll also talk about flat design. So I'll kind of talk about the history of some of the design practices in the industry and where they've gone. And then kind of looking forward, material design. Anybody heard of material design before? Okay, cool. And then we'll talk about some of the best practices at the very end. So how do we ensure efficient usage moving forward? So first I want to talk about skeuomorphism. So skeuomorphism, for anybody that doesn't know, is this practice of, in software, in our user interface, we try to make things look like their physical counterparts. So this is a pretty good example where all the knobs and the buttons and the dials and even the gauge there is intended to look almost exactly like its physical counterpart. Right? So this is usually the first approach that a lot of people take, especially in our industry when they're trying to design an engineering system. They want to make it look like what a user would be used to, right? So if I want to put a knob or a dial, I want to make it look exactly like someone would use in a physical system. So we'll talk about kind of where that's good and where that's bad, some of the cost benefit. This is really the approach that LabVIEW took, especially in the beginning. So here we have one of our DMM soft front panels, and here we have a front panel of a actual physical DMM, and you can see a lot of the similarities. So the intention was to make it look really similar in software to what it looks like physically in the hardware. And the point of that is that we want to get people up and running as quickly as possible. So they're probably really used to this interface so that they can start using this pretty quickly. So that's one of the benefits of skeuomorphic design, is if we make it look like a physical system, people already know how they're supposed to use it. So that's a thing to keep in mind. And we reflected this in a lot of our front panel controls and indicators in LabVIEW over the years. So if you remember some of these, you'll see things like these big drop shadows and a lot of the lighting changes on these different indicators. They're really intended to reflect the physical counterpart. So just out of curiosity, who likes to design skeuomorphic? Now that you know what skeuomorphism is, whose user interfaces usually tend towards skeuomorphic? Nobody's? One guys? Two guys? Okay, come on, let's be honest. It's most of us, right? That's usually what we go to first. And for a lot of us, that can be exactly what we need, because we do have people that are moving from physical systems to software systems. Flat design, the intention of flat design, kind of why it came about, is a lot of people looked at software user interfaces and said, well, we don't actually have to model the physical system, because for a lot of things we can do things more efficiently by taking out a lot of that shadow and lighting, and it just introduces some complexity that we don't need in software. So we can really simplify and move towards a much cleaner approach with flat design. So this is a toolkit provided by Rafa Solutions, which is really nice. It provides a really simple, clean interface. So this is also something that we moved forward to in NXG. So as you saw, we released LabVIEW NXG today. Very exciting. For a lot of our front panel controls and indicators, that's really the design paradigm that we've tried to go for, is this flat design approach. This is really kind of moved towards the industry standard now for software user interfaces. The idea is to keep things extremely clean and extremely modern looking. So often the question comes up, or I get asked a lot, what's different about the NXG UI? We know it looks different, and we think it looks better, but what's actually changed? And really that's kind of the intention, is we moved away from skeuomorphic more towards flat design. Any questions so far? I know I'm going pretty quick. Any thoughts, comments? Go ahead.
Is the NXG's UI vector-based?
Yes, yeah. So we have vector-based graphics. We're based on WPF, which allows for like resolution-independent scaling and hardware acceleration and vector-based graphics, yeah, which is what allowed us to support Zoom. So actually, originally, the original LabVIEW was, or the LabVIEW 2017 is based on Windows GEI, which is actually a 34-year-old technology, which forces us to work more in pixels than in actual vector objects. And so that's one of the big changes we made. Any other questions, comments? You know, who uses flat design more in their designs? Okay, pretty popular. Nice. Good. Keeping up to date. Good stuff. There's a lot of flat design user interface toolkits out there right now. If you haven't worked with them before, these are some of my favorite. These are available on the LabVIEW Tools Network. So JKI just released recently a flat UI toolkit. JDP Science has one. JDP Science is more kind of on the material design, I would say. maybe not as flat. LabVIEW Technologies has one, and Rapid Solutions has two, which are both really good. Anybody use these before? Yeah? Any commentary, reviews? Have any thoughts? Looks really nice. Good. That's great. Any feedback?
I like it a lot because you can customize them a lot more, and you have more abilities to use LabVIEW itself, like the controls, like you're kind of limited, at least I feel like.
Sure. Yeah. Very fair. Anybody else? Any other thoughts on this? Go ahead.
Yeah, I noticed that some of these flat designs sometimes have two sides. I really like the JKI flat design. It seems to address that.
Yeah.
This is something that
Okay, cool. Anybody else? Any other issues resizing the flat? Okay. Good. Okay, so awesome. Sounds like the flat designs are working pretty well. A lot of people are using them. One thing about the customization, I think I should include a little more in my presentation. One thing that I don't think was touched on at all at NXG when we launched it today, the keynote, was so it's all based on C#, WPF, and actually includes the ability to incorporate your own WPF controls. So the whole ecosystem out there right now of WPF controls can be taken advantage of in NXG by importing your WPF objects. So if you're curious, feel free to send me an email because we have some demo material and documentation on how to do that. All right, so the third design concept we'll talk about is material design. Material design was a design language, you can call it, quote unquote, that was developed by Google and launched in 2014. And the idea here is almost to take back some of the components that we saw in skeuomorphic design, which is including lighting and shadows, to really use the z-axis to bring things that are more important to our users up to the forefront. So it actually brought back things like the drop shadows. So here you can see that we have the drop shadows, and this is really what we see throughout all of Google's platform. And the reason is they follow these really important tenets, and they have really good documentation over all of these different controls and indicators, and the reasons they do what they do. The first one is that material is a metaphor. And so what that means is that the material that we're working with is supposed to look like things that we're very familiar with, but it's supposed to be a metaphor for it, where we can do things like include drop shadows to make it seem like it's coming off the page. So it's really this layering that we can do with shadows. Bold, graphic, and intentional. This is the intention that we can bring attention to the important parts of our user interface using color and using bold colors to stand out from the rest of our interface. And then finally, motion provides meaning. So this might be a little more specific to some of Google's things, but the way their objects move when the front panel changes is really important, so they focus a lot on the meaning behind the motion. Any questions on material design? There's not a lot of material design toolkits out there right now, but this is just kind of a fun thing to look into, maybe keep aware of. All right, the final one I wanted to talk about is matching user expectations. So who designs, let's take a survey. Let's go between mobile applications, web applications, and desktop. So who does primarily desktop applications? Okay, so pretty much everyone. Who does primarily web applications? Anybody. Who makes web applications? A couple people. Who makes mobile applications? Okay, one person. Did you do all three? That's impressive. That's good stuff. Okay. So matching user expectations in LabVIEW. So the reason I asked that is between desktop, web, and mobile, people have different expectations for what they're looking for. And one of the ways that we can facilitate a lot of that in LabVIEW is using a lot of these very specific customization features, especially for our window appearance, to make it look specific to the platform that we're building it for. And so if anybody hasn't worked with window appearance before, if you go into VI properties and choose window appearance, there's a lot of different things you can configure to make your user interface look specific to the platform you're developing. Also, paying attention to detail is really important as well. So things like making sure that the exit button of your application, if you don't want it to stop or close down your application, or you want it to go into a shutdown procedure, is an important thing to keep in mind. Including things like progress bars is another way to give your user an indication of what's happening, that something is going on, or how far through a process they are. Using things like a status bar to tell the user in what state the system might be in, or what is currently being acted upon is really important as well. So that included with pointer busy icons are important ways to show the user that our application hasn't just stalled. So we want to make sure that we're always providing feedback to the user and making sure that they're aware of what we're doing. Finally, smaller things like tip strips, making sure that our dialogues are modal. So that means that the user has to interact with them or manually close them out before they can access the application behind them. Doing things like adding decals to buttons and customizing the runtime menu, they might seem really small, but when you include all of them together, you can make some applications that look really good and match what our user is expecting of us. All right, so that's kind of efficient usage, I would say, covering a good amount of that. Some best practices, consistency is king, so what I would recommend is picking a design style and sticking with it. So you want to make sure that you're consistent throughout your application because differences can be distracting to our user. Limiting our color palette is also important. We see a lot of people will just pick whatever colors they want to, and that can be distracting as well. So we want to keep it to 3 or 4 primary colors. And finally, simplicity equals success. So the more minimal you can make your user interface, the better. And so towards guiding our user through the appropriate course of action for whatever state the system is in, that's really important to keep our user interface simple so that we can easily do that for them. Any questions on efficient usage or any comments anybody wants to add? Best practices. You're the thought leaders of the LabVIEW community. What do you got? Yeah, so I think that's one people miss a lot, and that's, I don't know if everybody heard of it, is saying feedback. And so when a process finishes or when I click a button even, we want to make sure that the user knows that something happened. Because a lot of times we'll kind of gloss over that, and the user will click things and click stop, and it gives no indication that the application stopped or finished or went to a different state. So that's a good one. Anybody else? Go ahead.
One thing I particularly see a lot in LabVIEW is too many windows. Trying to use panes instead of panels to minimize the number of windows. It's appropriate for dialogue and things like that. Like everything will separate lines.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, so making sure that we keep in a primary window is probably best practice, and then spawn up dialogues, but only for specific tasks is an important one. Go ahead.
So I work for an integrator, and speaking to your consistency is key point. So we have a number of different machines that all use different software bases. And so creating a consistent customer experience, between LabVIEW, Siemens, Allen Bradley is something that we work really, really hard for. And so sometimes we have to, create all of the buttons that look like, Allen Bradley or Siemens. So that's something that we work really hard at.
Yeah, that's a great point. And actually, if I can move out of the slides for a second. That's one thing that we are trying to do in NXG. So I have a version of NXG installed right here. So this is what we call the platform developer preview. So this is the things that our customer advisory board usually work with. But this is also very similar to what you get with the technology preview, everything I'm showing here. So one of the things that we've added, if I make a new VI really quick, is we can put down different numeric controls and indicators. And even with the development of our user interface, we've tried to do a lot of cool stuff. So one is that we have the snap to grid alignment. So to make it easier to line up our different controls and really understand our user interface, we put you into this layout mode when you're dropping something down so that you can understand the relationships between all the different controls. So as I expand things, I don't know if you can see, but there's light blue lines that appear to help me know that things are lined up. The other thing that we've done is if I put down some more exciting ones, like if I put down a tank, a little slow because I'm on a VM right now, and I change some of these values. So I turn on the LED, and then if I select a group, so back to the consistency is king comment, what we've added up here in the visual style box you can see in the configuration pane in the top right are two things, and those are textures and colors. And so moving forward, these are defined right now by LabVIEW, but what we want to do is give users access to these and actually define their own textures and colors and even skins to really apply a consistent visual style across their whole front panel with the click of a button. So you can see that I can change the color of my tank had some information in it. You can see that I can change the color of all my controls and indicators with a click of a button, or the visual style. So right now we only have 4. So we have a flat, we have an IDE one, a metallic, and a tint one, and we're working right now on a system one. But the idea here is that we could quickly flip between different ones and even configure our own for our company, or if we're an integrator, for our customer. Is the idea. Any thoughts, comments, feedback on that? Go ahead. Yeah, so yeah, that's a big one, is giving programmatic access to everything that we can do manually is very important.
It's just something I do a lot is like using like Escape or some vector graphics tool, like create a custom image or something.
Yeah, so we can do the same thing here. So I don't know if Boolean control is supported right now, but I can put down like an image. Let's try setting that. So here we support a lot of different image files. So we support PNG, BMP, JPEG, and SVG. So for those that don't know, SVG is the vector graphic format. So if I have like a water turbine that's in my system, I can apply this, and you can see really clean lines. Looks really good, and I can even zoom in on it, and we still have that resolution way up close. So yeah, full vector graphic support. Any other comments, questions? Go ahead.
So the kind of thing that color change, is that only flexible colors?
Yeah, so actually what we're working on right now is what we call the theme editor, and the theme editor will expose, I think right now it's about 50 different brush styles for all of the different colors that your controller indicator could maintain. And there's a simple and a complex. The complex has 50, but the simple has like 4 different ones. But yeah, so you'll be able to do like on-off states for LEDs and like what your tank would, what color the tank would be. So yeah, we're working on that right now. Any other comments, questions, concerns? Cool, right? Pretty exciting stuff. Okay, cool. I'll hop back to slides real quick, and then maybe we'll come back and do some more NXG stuff. Just to go back to some resources real quick, because I know this is probably one of the best things to take away, because I don't have all the answers. Really cool stuff out there, though. There is a UI interest group right now on NI.com. On the LabVIEW Tools Network, there's a UI controls category, if you haven't seen it. That's where you can see all the JKI, the RAFA solutions, and then there's also a user interface category on Lava, which I think is really cool, because a lot of that stuff is free and a simple download. So these are usually the 3 things that I go to when I'm looking for cool UI stuff. Does anybody have any others? Just out of curiosity. So specifically for design, because I'll get into some of the other ones moving forward. No? Okay, cool. Everybody get this? Okay, we'll move on. We'll send out the slides too, or they can be accessed, however that works. All right, so adaptability. So somebody already mentioned resize, so we'll talk about that. So we cover layout, resize. We'll also mention web UIs, and we might even play around with them a little bit in NXG. And then some best practices. So planning ahead, deciding on our layout early and sticking with it, and knowing our UI requirements ahead of time are what I would call kind of best practices. I don't know if anybody's seen this before. This was produced in a UI best practices, tips and tricks tutorial a few years ago, and it kind of displays in a Windows application. This is a pretty common layout that we try to adhere to, which is that we have a title area on the top, we have menus and commands on the left, and then we have an expandable content area where we can put our graphs or our charts or our indicators, and then we'll have a status bar on the bottom. And so the point of laying out our UI before we even put down a front panel controller indicator is to make sure that we recognize these different areas and we don't put things in the wrong area when we need to. And this helps us scale as well. So when we need to add a new piece of content or we need to add a new command, we know where it goes. So resize in LabVIEW. Who's made some resizable applications in LabVIEw? Good experience? How'd it go? Good? Okay. Say it again? Right, yeah. So we run into some issues. For those that haven't tried resize, though, for a lot of simple applications, we can do resize in LabVIEW today. So if nobody's worked with splitters before, those are really the primary way to do it. So we can put down horizontal and vertical splitters And what they do is they divide our front panel into panes. And when we have a pane, what we can do is right-click on a control and say Scale Object with Pane. And when we do that, whenever we resize the front panel, we can see that it'll resize alongside it. And with that, there's different ways that we can size the splitters and lock the splitters. So we can either lock splitters to the left pane or to the right pane, or we can size them in relation to the overall size of our front panel. There's also a resize panel event, which we can, resize pane event, which we can respond to with an event structure. It's also important to set a minimum screen size. That's another issue a lot of people run into with resize, is at some point you don't want your users to go too small or they'll run into some issues. And then finally, event-driven pane sliding. So there's some good examples out there of buttons that we can put down on our front panel that when we respond to them, they can remove a pane from the UI. Has anybody done these kind of practices before? Yeah, go ahead. Oh, do you have any thoughts, comments, feedback? Sorry, I forgot I didn't give you a prompt.
I mean, it was like, yeah, I said earlier, it's going to be kind of tedious.
Sure. Go ahead.
There's a problem using the origin of each pane corner. Once it gets out of there, it's moving.
Yeah, that's a good point. Go ahead.
I've got some issues whenever I'm moving between monitors with different resolutions. And the buttons don't seem to resize themselves like I would expect.
Amen.
Yeah. That's definitely a big one. I'm glad you guys hit those. Go ahead.
Everybody likes a big monitor on their desk developing their nice UIs, and then the little screen out on the production floor.
Right, yeah. Things change, definitely. And I'm glad you guys hit those. Those are some that we're trying to address in NHG as well. So I just want to go through a couple things that we're trying to do. You might have noticed this one. We do have a fixed canvas now when we design our front panels. So we have an unlimited block diagram, but we want to have a fixed canvas because it allows our users to understand what it's going to look like at different sizes before they deploy it, right? What we've also done is we've added the functionality to run the VI in a new window right from the IDE. So what this is supposed to give us is an immediate indication of what it's going to look like when we run it, so we don't have to go through building a specification. Another thing that we're working on, which I just realized isn't working right now for me, is this idea of guidelines. So in the past, when we had to put down splitters and panes, and they work differently on different monitors and resolutions, what we can do now is we have this technology called guides, where we can click and drag from either the top or the bottom pane, and these will add what we call guidelines. And guidelines are things that we can attach to the sides or the tops or bottoms of different front panel controls and indicators, and they'll tell us how the object is going to respond upon a resize. So we can easily pull those out, attach them to controls, and then when we run, we can resize the overall window to see how they respond. And so we are investing a lot to make that process a lot easier and making resize better. Any thoughts on that? Comments, questions? Go ahead.
Do you also have the option for a unlimited canvas view for users who tend to make very, very large front panels?
Interesting.
Based on, they're doing research and they're messing with values, and so they need a lot of graphs and other kinds of controls.
Yeah, so at the moment we don't, but you can set your own front panel size. I don't know the maximums at the moment, but you can make them pretty large. But you're in the best UI tips and tricks session, so I would say you probably don't want to make giant user interfaces. Go ahead. Yeah, that's incredible. Go ahead.
Part of the solve factor that affected I had a coworker who brought me using like a type kind of like a and we had another thing one of the UI side.
Yeah.
The middle side works fine. We found that when we do the side and then we bring it back, we have to create code kind of put the controls in the right location with respect to the certain position. So kind of wondering if the guidelines kind of helping out a little bit. It seems like there's a big solution.
Yeah, so the guidelines are supposed to have a few different properties. One being that we can set the percent that they scale by as we scale, and we can set them to an absolute position, so that might help with kind of what you're mentioning, where when we go to the minimum size, they always stay at the same place. And then the third one would be pixel scaling, so we can set what pixel percentage they should scale by.
Like when you open a new document in Photoshop, it presents you a list of common resolutions. Why don't you have a drop-down for canvas and common monitor size?
So actually, that's in development right now. We're working on one for like mobile and normal desktop applications. So yeah, that's good feedback though. I appreciate it.
You guys have a feature where the users, when it's in runtime, the users can move the controls. Because with that, right now, I'm using an event structure to, trace the mouse, use clicks on a controller to make it move it based on where the mouse is at.
Yeah.
It's still kind of pain in the butt.
Yeah, that's a good question. So in my mind, I don't know if you saw the keynote today, but that's kind of what we were doing, or a little bit with dynamic control creation. It would probably be along those lines. If we dynamically created a control and then tracked along the mouse when we had the mouse down event triggered, that could be a way to do it. But yeah, so I think that's a tricky situation we run into sometimes. Sometimes people want they want to be able to make LabVIEW in LabVIEW. And so he kind of runs into this meta situation of like how many levels deep do you go? That's a good point though. Any other comments, questions? Go ahead. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, so we run into that issue sometimes with splitters because like the more you have, the better it resizes because then every control is really like in its own splitter. But it can take up a lot of space, especially if you have like the scroll bars. Go ahead.
In web development, we talk about responsive design, which kind of reflects the ability to have the same application on your phone versus your desktop. Is there the ability to create multiple layouts and then build two or build all three of them in?
That's a really good question. So in web design, there's really three right now. There's resize, which is really just the ability to scale things with your pane. There's responsive, which things will snap into into a cohesive group as we make it smaller or larger. And then there's also reflow, which it changes kind of the flow of our user interface as we change our design. So we're talking through all of those right now and kind of working through those. Actually, I didn't notice Jeff in the back, especially have the UI R&D group manager that's sitting right there. He's waving his hand. If you guys want to talk to him after, you can swarm him. But this is good feedback. I'm sure he appreciates this. Yeah, so I guess to answer the question, we're working through it right now. We're still working on some stuff. So I mentioned some of these. So these are, I don't think in NXG right now, but a couple of them are in the tech preview. So if you go to mi.com/tech-preview and download the 2.0 beta, you can start working with some of these. So web UIs, they mentioned web UIs today in the keynote as well, so that's also in the mi.com/tech-preview. As we talked about, it gives you open access to the DOM.html widgets and CSS, and you can run it in any browser because it's just JavaScript and HTML5. So here if I put down some elements, it'll look like LabVIEW as they showed already. But one difference being that in the HTML tab, you can go there and you can see the CSS and the JavaScript and the HTML of all of the objects that you can create, or that you created, and you can edit it. So one thing we can do is pull up my in here. So one thing I can do is I can put in like an iframe if I want to. So this is an iframe from forecast.io, and I can apply this and jump back to my panel. And if I can connect to the internet, there you can see that I can immediately embed a widget that's showing me the temperature in Spain, or the weather in Spain at the moment. Another cool thing that I can do is if I actually want to see what the weather not only is, but looks like, is because the panel is actually a live browser that's running right now. I have two options. I have an image and I have a URL image. If I put down a URL image and I put in a source URL, I don't know if this webcam is still running. Maybe not. Let's see. No, so I think the webcam is no longer live. I should have checked it earlier. But we can run live webcams to actually validate what the weather would look like in our WebVIEW. So WebVIEWs have a lot of cool UI capabilities, so I recommend checking those out. Again, they're in the tech preview. And I wanted to quickly get through a couple other things because we got Sungjin, who's going to do a really cool demo. This is another resources page. There's a couple of really cool blog posts in here. Again, you can go to the WebVIEWs and NHE 2.0 beta. I think ProLucid has one of the coolest resizable UI tutorials. If you want to go through that, if you haven't worked with splitters or how things resize before, I'd recommend doing that. And then we have a tutorial over 10 tips and tricks for building effective user interfaces in LabVIEW, which is really cool. And then finally, I want to talk about modularity real quick. So modularity can be a tricky one because the modularity of our user interface is often reflected by the modularity of our application. So the first step to getting a modular user interface is to make a modular application. We actually have best practices when it comes to software architecture and reference frameworks. So modular code equals a modular UI. Use reference frameworks and architectures. Subpanels allow you to call a VI inside of a panel at runtime dynamically. So one thing we can create is a plugin architecture where we can dynamically load a bunch of VI front panels depending on what's in the directory. So that allows us to dynamically insert new VIs. Modal dialog boxes. This kind of goes back to the comment about how many windows should you have open at the moment. Should usually just be one, and then we'll have a modal dialog that forces the user to interact with it before they can get back to the original application. So I mentioned those. So some resources, if you haven't looked at large apps yet for advanced application development, that's one of our best resource links. Building a subpanel-based user interface on the same LAN. I don't know if anyone's seen that blog before. It's really good. And then Eli Carey, my manager, actually wrote one on plugin architecture. So those are all really good if you want to check those out. And then I think finally we'll pass it over to Sungjin, who has a really cool demo that he's going to show us. So Sungjin is from Korea. He is he won a LabVIEW contest for this UI that he's going to show us. So I will pass it over to him, I think. Let's give him a round of applause.
Good afternoon. Sorry, but my English is not, please understand. Yeah, I'm Sungjin, and I am Asian coding contest champion. So, nice to meet you. Thanks for inviting me. Okay, I introduced my project. The title is Model House Simulation on the 3D platform. This project uses the 3D objects, and I install my hardware. There. First, I'm using an object using AutoCAD Civil 3D, and these objects are too heavy, so I removed the color, and so I use the STR file format. And here the Omima product for viewing in 3D, and here the up-down gyro sensor, and gyro sensor is used to detect movement of the head, C-side. And I make it the head guy. Using an XFL sensor, this enables to movement at 3D platform, and I need to communication equipment. And I chose the NI8452 to communication with these sensors, I-SCSI communication. Okay. Simulated or information.
I don't know, you guys want to see the video or do you want him to simulate the demo? What do you think? Let's do both. Let's start with the video. Any questions while we're getting set up? Thoughts, comments, best practices that we didn't cover? No, covered it all. You guys are expert UI designers. Tell us more about
Yeah, it was the competition that we had in Asia, that all China or Japan or Korea, all the big developers had that competition, and then the title of the subject of the competition is making a VR application. So that we got the champion among the all Asian companies.
Yeah, so we hold, after NIWeek, we hold NI Days events throughout the world, and so this was at the Korean NI Days event. Sure, Jill, do you?
Yeah, hardware was USB 484. 8452. And then the VR hardware is it couldn't be any hardware. It could be any hardware as a VR because it's kind of display. But I don't.
Go ahead. Maybe, yeah. Try to see what we did. Any questions for Jeff Peters while we're here with them? He loves being put on the spotlight. The future of LabVIEW. Any questions on UI design and the future of LabVIEW? No? Nobody? Go ahead.
So you talked about earlier, someone asked about multiple windows, right? Talk a little bit about little windows, right? So I wanted to know, is there some sort of development going on right now to essentially load the front panel of your VI inside the same window? You know what I'm trying to say? So that way you're not having multiple windows pop up like you mentioned, or even you don't have to interact with one window of another before you turn to the previous. It's all within one application. And I know you can usually work around with tabs sometimes. It's all within one PI. It's kind of a very, work around something like that.
I forgot an answer, Jeff. Do you want to?
So are you referring to LabVIEW 2017 or NXG?
NXG, sure.
Okay. So in LabVIEW 2017, if I understood your question correctly, that's essentially what a subpanel offers you.
Okay.
Is the ability to take a VI and then put it into a place in your main UI, I guess, is some form of composition. In NXG, we do not have the subpanel feature yet, and it's something that we're looking at. We know that users use it a lot, and we know that we want to build a correct model around it. So it is a use case that we want to support in NXG in a future release.
Thanks, Jeff. All right, looks like we're good to go with the video. Let's see what we got.
카운트 센서라고 불리는데 이것 또한 이제 NIWeek 장비를 통해서 이제 데이터를 합수가 있습니다. 우선 저희 테마는 3D 플랫폼에서 가장 기술되는 거는 뭔가 사물을 놓고 사물을 탐색하는 게 아닌가 싶어서 일단 3D 모델하우스 시뮬레이션을 시작했어요. 일단은 3D 모델하우스 시뮬레이션 한번 보시죠. 이게 바로 메인입니다. 보시면 이제 손에 끼고 있는 엑셀 센서를 통해서 왼쪽으로 누르는 힘을 통해서 왼쪽으로 이동하고요. 왼쪽, 오른쪽으로 누르는 힘을 통해서 오른쪽으로 이동합니다. 그럼 인포메이션을 한번 선택해 볼게요. 선택 같은 경우는 손바닥을 저에게 당기는 방향으로 통해서 셀렉션 되게 되어 있습니다. 네, 간단하게 인포메이션에 설명이 나오고요. 네, 그리고 다시 메인 메뉴 돌아가서 네. 그럼 이제 메인 메뉴에서 이제 시뮬레이션 한번 시작해 볼게요. 이게 3D 모델하우스 시뮬레이션이거든요. 내 손바닥을 이제 가라고 생각하게 되면 이제 무브 움직이는 동작에 대한 센서를 인식하게 됩니다. 이제 왼쪽 이미지는 왼쪽 눈을 통해서 보여지고 오른쪽 이미지는 오른쪽 눈을 통해서 보여져서 이제 서로 간의 눈과 이제 미간 간격을 계산해서 이제 서로 간의 이미지를 좀 다른 각도로 보여주게 됩니다. 근데 보시다시피 이제 이것도 누르는 힘을 통해서 움직이게 되어 있거든요. 손을 앞쪽으로 누르면 전진하고 뒤쪽을 누르면 후진하고 오른쪽으로 누르면 오른쪽 이동하고 왼쪽으로 누르면 왼쪽으로 이동합니다. 물론 45도나 원 형태로 해서 모든 각도로 움직일 수 있습니다. 모든 각도에 대해서 계산이 끝났고요. 이제 여기서 이제 VR 센서에 관련된 자이로 센서에 이동해서 이제 이 보여지는 화면의 각도를 계산하게 됩니다. 그래서 이게 VR 센서 오른쪽으로 돌리게 되면은 오른쪽 화면 보이고 왼쪽으로 돌리면 왼쪽의 화면 보이고 바닥을 볼 수도 있고요. 이렇게 하늘에는 없지만 하늘도 볼 수 있습니다. 이렇게 해서 이제 전체적으로 모델하우스를 이제 디벨로퍼가 개발을 하고 그거를 유저에게 배포해서 실제로 이렇게 모델하우스를 돌아다닐 수 있는 그냥 그런 걸 처음에 생각해서 만들게 됐습니다. 이게 플레이를 하다가 메인 메뉴로 가갈 때가 좀 있잖아요. 이렇게 손바닥을 펴시고 한번 돌리시면 됩니다. 손바닥 한 방향으로 메뉴를 선택하게 되고 여기서 이제 지속할지 아니면은 다시 시작할지 저 같은 경우는 일단 한번 나가보겠습니다. 서브 메뉴로 나가고 메인 메뉴도 끄면은 프로그램이 종료됩니다.
Anybody have any questions for Sung-Jin? If you guys are interested in some VR applications, some 3D UI, I would recommend coming to the keynote tomorrow morning. They're going to have some exciting stuff running. Any other questions for Sung-Jin? Oh, yeah. Awesome. Well, I think that's all we have for you guys. Anybody have any questions or comments? Go ahead.
Sorry. I do not know. Yeah, with the links and stuff. I do not know.
Yes, yeah. Right now we're working on what we call data virtualization. So that's the ability to pull data that we're actively